This is what I'm telling you this. So what does this mean and why does it matter? The short answer is, from a financial perspective, write this down. Ego costs you money. Let me repeat that again. Ego costs you money. 11 signs your ego might be keeping you broke. Your ego is keeping you broke if, and number one, you blame. You blame. If you find yourself blaming people, whether a person, a situation, or a circumstance, it's coming from the ego, right? Maybe if you had to put a dollar amount on it, and I promise you, if you could figure out that dollar amount, you would probably take this exercise very, very seriously and not let your ego cost you another single penny. Here's the deal. How many of your financial, now we're talking about money, thinking about money now, how many of your financial decisions do you think you make consciously? Right? Let's think about this for a second. If you're thinking about money, whether it's investing, whether, putting money aside to grow, not in crypto, we're not talking about crypto, right? Investing, other investments, saving, you want to save your money, or you're budgeting, or you're thinking about something simple as just going out and buying groceries, right? Going to buy some milk and some bread and all this kind of stuff. The ego is that inner voice that you hear. The ego, this is what's giving you the rationale for your financial behavior. Why am I telling you this? Because 90% of people aren't even aware of that little voice. Right? They're not even aware. And the people that are aware don't know how to control it. They just listen to it. Whatever the voice says, they just do it, right? They act on behalf of that voice. This is why I'm telling you this. So what does this mean and why does it matter? The short answer is, from a financial perspective, write this down. Ego costs you money. Let me repeat that again. Ego costs you money, right? Ego costs you money. So let's look at the ego. I have some characteristics of the ego. Let's go into it and we're going to see. All right. Are you ready? The ego wants to be heard. This is the inner voice that chatters endlessly in your mind. All right. That's that little voice right now as I'm talking. There's that little voice, that inner voice. There's the ego, right? And it's endlessly chatting. Sometimes many people want to put duct tape across the ego's mouth. We'll talk about that today. I'll show you how to do that, all right? So the ego constantly wants to be heard, yes? What else? The ego wants safety. You see that man there in a bubble, right? That's complete safety, all right? Living in a bubble. So with regards to money, ego creates anxiety, right? If the market is falling, what am I going to do? Oh my goodness, what's going to happen to my money? Where should I invest now? How do I save more money? The value of my home is lower. My net worth is the lowest it's ever been in decades, right? This is the ego talking. That's the ego, right? So the ego wants safety. Let me tell you something. Anytime you are doing anything that's relatively uncomfortable and that little voice comes into your mind, hey, what are you doing? What are you doing, Jermaine? That's the ego talking, right? That's the ego talking. And primarily, the ego wants safety. Remember that. This is very important for you to understand, because if you are doing something or you want to do something that your ego thinks is not safe, it's going to shut it down, right? And then you'll find yourself feeling uncomfortable, not wanting to do it, not wanting to move ahead, even though it's completely okay, right? What else? The ego lives in a physical reality. See, the ego doesn't know what the answers are inside, right? The ego doesn't look for internal answers. What does it do? It seeks them outside. So, for example, your self-worth, an egotistical person, to the ego, it's defined in the physical terms, right? So how much money do I have? That's what the ego looks at for self-worth. How big is my house? Some people define their self-worth by the size of their house. That's from the ego. What will others think about me, right? If this question is the primary question, what will others think about me? They're coming from the perspective of ego, all right? Ego wants to survive. The ego wants to survive. So it consumes any messages that gives it energy. Now, remember what I said earlier. The ego wants safety. The ego wants to survive. The ego looks in the physical reality. So it's going to look for messages that's going to prove it right. All right? The ego looks for messages around. I hope you're understanding what I'm saying. It's looking for clues all around you to prove you right. So it looks for information that's going to confirm its own biasness, right? So I'll give you an example. Let's say that the bias is towards crypto being a great investment. So ego says, yeah, crypto is a great investment. You want to do it. You know what the ego does? The ego goes and it wants information about rising crypto prices. And it's going to ignore all of the information about the falling crypto prices. You will convince yourself, if you're coming from the ego perspective, you will convince yourself to do it, right? And vice versa. Also, the vice versa is true. So that means if you know the investment is a good investment, but your ego is scared, it will find reasons not to do it. So the ego wants to survive. The next, ego rationalizes. This is tying into what I said previously. So the ego looks at it. I'll give you another example. The ego looks at it as, if I'm successful, it means that I was right. It's a confirmation. I was right. And if I failed, if I tried something and I failed at it, it just means, oh, that was a coincidence, or it was a fluke. It was an accident. And this is how the ego justifies and rationalizes things. I'm going to give you 11 signs that your ego might be keeping you broke. All right, get your pen and paper handy. We are going to jump into our topic. 11 signs your ego might be keeping you broke. Your ego is keeping you broke if, and number one, you blame. You blame. If you find yourself blaming people, whether a person, a situation, or a circumstance, it's coming from the ego, right? Maybe you blame your parents for not teaching you more about money. Maybe you blame the economy for things being so expensive. Maybe you blame the high interest rate environments that's happening. And you have these excuses, right? Excuses about no money or no time or all of these things, right? So the blame game is a big tip-off. This is a big sign, all right? The blame game, the blame game. So number one is blame. Number two, again, it's excuses. I don't have the money. I don't have the time. Let me give you a little hint here. When someone gives an excuse, they're saying, leave me alone. I don't want to be challenged. That's coming from the perspective of the ego. Okay? That's coming from the perspective of the ego. So excuses is another big sign. What's another big one? You know it all. Man, oh man, you just know it all. Like nobody can tell you anything. The person that comes from this perspective says, I can do much better. They have a I can do much better attitude. right? Yeah, I see all of these. I could do that much better. I could present much better. I could say it much better. I could do it much better. I already know. They have that mindset. I already know that. You know, this is one of the things that's banned in our household. Our kids are not allowed to say, I already know that, right? And it's because of this reason, coming from the egotistical. Because a person that's saying, I already know that, guess what they do? They tune you out. They tune you out. You can't teach someone that already knows everything, right? I already know that. They tend not to listen to advice. Can't teach me anything. I remember when I was working at a company called Kretschmar in Don Mills, Victoria Park in Lawrence area in Scarborough. And my job was to train a lot of the mechanics how to use some of the equipment. And, you know, you would train them. And after you finish training them, immediately you ask them, do you understand everything? And guess what they say? They immediately nod their head. Yeah, I understand. Even though a big majority of them didn't understand or didn't know, they still nodded their head. Yeah, why? They're protecting their ego. By the way, the ego does not like to be bruised, okay? Remember, it primarily wants to be right. Right? So it's going to protect that at all costs. So even though these people didn't know how to use the equipment, they're still saying, yeah, I know, right? Because they're protecting their ego. Number 4, defensive. You're always defensive, right? You're always explaining. You're always defending. You know, you talk to the person, you said, hey, listen, you're 35, you haven't started saving any money. And they start defending and explaining why they haven't started saving any money. You haven't started your long-term saving. They defend exactly why they haven't saved for their long terms. By the way, I want to tell you something, a little bit of digression here. The graveyard, in the graveyard, if you were to wake up everyone that's dead in the graveyard, they're all going to have a reason why they're in the graveyard. Everybody, right? I got cancer. I got hit by a car. I fell off of a building. You know, everyone is going to have a reason as to why they're in the graveyard, right? I'm telling you that because from an egotistical perspective, we tend to be very defensive and explaining why. It's not about the why. It's not about defending, right? The reason. Make sense? It's not about that. Number 5, people pleaser. You're a people pleaser. I don't want people to avoid me. I want people to like me. This person's sole desire is to avoid conflict. They don't want any conflict. They don't want to make people unhappy. Their whole purpose is to make other people happy. I've seen once where they're such people pleasers that a salesperson literally will offer them a product that they don't need, right? They have tons of these products. They don't need it, but just so they don't make the salesperson unhappy, they purchase. They're a people pleaser, right? They can't say no. They can't say no. Number 6, fear. Fear. They act out of fear, or they don't act out of fear. When they act, it's out of fear. And when they don't act, it's also out of fear. What if I mess up? What if I make a mistake? What if I'm not perfect? And if you find yourself thinking like this, you got to step back a second and you got to ask a follow-up question. Here's my secret follow-up question. Are you ready? Write this down. Secret follow-up question. When I find myself thinking, oh man, what if I mess up? Or what if it doesn't work out the way I think it's going to work out? Or what if it's not perfect? Secret question to combat all of this. What is the worst that can possibly happen? And you list all of the worst things that can possibly happen. And then you assess your risk based on that, not based on fear, but based on your assessment. Okay, so that's number 6. That's number 6. Number 7, let's do a recap. So number 1 is the blame game. Number 2 is excuses. Number 3 is you know it all. Number 4 is you're defensive. Number 5 is you're a people pleaser. Number 6 is fear. You act out of fear. And number 7 is jealousy. Jealousy is a big one. Why? You see your neighbor, they do the concrete around their house. Guess what you do? You go and get quotes and start doing the concrete around your house. The neighbor goes and gets a pool. You go get a pool, right? They upgrade their car. You upgrade your car. They go buy a nice expensive belt. You go buy a nice expensive belt. And this starts to propel this unnecessary spending that you wouldn't have done otherwise. Jealousy, right? Jealousy. Another one that fuels this is social media. Social media causes so many people to do things that they normally wouldn't do, but they're seeing it, right? And I want to give you something about the social media, by the way. When someone posts something for 30 seconds or a picture, I want you to understand that's a moment. Nobody posts on social media when they're falling apart, when life is not working. They're giving you a moment in time. They're giving you their highlight reel. You know, when you're watching right now, you can go back and, you know, if you wanted to see what happened with the World Cup, you could watch the highlight reels, the important moments, right? The top moments where they scored the ball, or, you know, they made an amazing pass, or, you know, they call this the highlight reels. These are the top moments of the entire game. You can actually trim these down into small 30-second segments, but that does not reflect the entire game. Same thing. Social media does not reflect the person's entire life. It's just a highlight reel. It's just a moment that was caught where they were happy, or, you know, showing to be happy anyway. Who knows if they were really happy? And then you go and you compare yourself to that. You compare yourself to the neighbor that went and upgraded their car and didn't know that they upgraded it all on credit. You were quite fine because yours was paid off. You didn't owe anybody any money. There's no debt on it. It worked fine. But you went and upgraded, right? You went and upgraded. I'm telling you this because it's a real story. We literally had a client, this was a couple of years ago, and the lady was about 400, and I don't recall the number, but it was around, let's say, $430 in the negative every month. And when we dug down, we found out, I said, why are you $430 in the negative? Something changed. What changed in the last little bit? And she went and she bought a car. And I said, how much is the car? How much are you paying every month for this car? And she was paying literally that exact amount, let's say $430. She was paying that every month. And this was what's causing her to be in the red. Before, she was in the black. She wasn't in the surplus, but she wasn't in the negative. And I said, well, why did you get a new car? She said, I wanted one. I said, okay, well, was the other one not working? She said, no, it was working fine. I said, well, was there an issue with it? Was there a reason why you wanted to upgrade the car? She's like, no, I wanted to upgrade it. So when we dug to the bottom of it, her coworker got a new car and she thought it was time for her to get a new car. Now she's $430 in the red every single month. Okay. Ego, right? It costs money. Most people, when the ego is costing them money, they don't even know it. This is the worst part. This is the worst part. One of our, I think it was the second Money Monday, was about inflation. And I labeled it, inflation is the silent thief. I'm going to tell you, ego has stolen more money from people than inflation has. Ego costs people so much money, they just don't know about it. They just don't know about it. So number 7 is jealousy. Number 8, self-righteous. Self-righteous. So when an ego-driven person asks what we do, right? Jermaine, what is it that you do? And I explain to them what we do. Someone coming from the ego will say, I could never do that. But their reply is not, I couldn't do it because of their skill set or because they are not capable of doing it. It's a condescending. They're talking down like, I would never do that, right? As if it's something that's beneath them. This is what we're talking about, self-righteous. Self-righteous. I don't know what's so wrong about helping families, putting them in better savings habit. We are the only company talking about saving money, putting money to better use, not wasting it, right? So I don't know what's so self-righteous about that, but many people come from that self-righteous direction. It's beneath them. So watch out for that. Watch out for that. Some people think that, just saving regular amount of money every single month is beneath them. Number 9, judgmental. So you present an idea to someone, you know for a fact that it's going to help them. You know for a fact it's going to put them in a better situation. And their response is, you probably just want to make money off of me. You're only doing this so you can make money off of me. While that could be true in many cases, the majority of the times that response is from the ego. They're coming from an ego-based response. All right. And number 10 is staying in the comfort zone. This is a huge one. What does the ego like? It likes to be right. It likes to be safe. So can the ego be safe outside of the comfort zone? The ego does not feel safe outside of the comfort zone. So people like to feel settled, right? They like to have that calmness that everything's okay. The boat is not rocking. They want to feel settled. The problem is you can't want more for somebody than they want for themselves, right? You can't want more for me than I want for me. It won't work. I can't want more for you than you want for yourself. So when someone is in the comfort zone, that ego is costing them money. Number 11, justification. It's always been done that way, Jermaine. Always it's been done that way. Why we want to change it? And they justify everything, right? They justify everything. They say things like, everyone I know around me is in debt. I actually heard someone say that before. Everyone I know is in debt. So it doesn't matter if I'm in debt, they justify. All right? They justify. So what were these 11 signs with the ego? The blame game, excuses, knowing it all, defensive, being a people pleaser, fear, jealousy, self-righteousness, judgmental, staying in the comfort zone, and justifying everything, right? So here's what I'm challenging you to do. Look at all of these 11 signs. I'll go back, all right? Look at these 11 signs and see, do you identify with any of these ego signs? Do you identify? Do you identify with number 1 and number 3? Do you identify with all of them? A little bit of some, right? Do you identify? I want you to take an assessment and an inventory. Which one of these ego signs is costing you money? Which ones is costing you money? Okay? Which one is costing you money? I have another question for you. How much money do you think your ego has cost you right now? We are December 19th, 2022. How much has the ego cost you up until now? If you had to put a dollar amount on it. And I promise you, if you could figure out that dollar amount, you would probably take this exercise very, very seriously and not let your ego cost you another single penny. I like this slide here. It's Albert Einstein drawing on the chalkboard. Now, I can't verify if he said this or not, but I just like the slide where it says ego equals I over knowledge, and more the knowledge, lesser the ego. Lesser the knowledge, more the ego. How do you silence the ego? Through awareness. You just need to become aware of what's happening. Aware of that little voice. That little voice is not you. The majority of people, they think that little voice in their head is them. So they accept whatever that little voice says and they just do it. They don't know it's completely different, right? You are not your ego. Your ego is not you.